Elders Hollow was a small town with a population of just over 2,000. Nestled in a valley surrounded by dense forests and rolling hills, it had a reputation for being a quiet, sleepy place where nothing much happened. But beneath its tranquil exterior, Elders Hollow harbored secrets, some of which had been buried for so long that even the oldest residents only spoke of them in hushed tones. The abandoned orphanage on the outskirts of town was one such secret. Built in the early 1900s, it had once been a grand building, designed to house and care for children who had lost their parents. However, after a series of mysterious disappearances and tragic accidents, it was shut down in the 1970s. Since then, it had been left to decay, its windows shattered, and its walls overgrown with ivy and moss. Jack, Emily, Sarah, and Ben had grown up hearing stories about the orphanage. Some said it was haunted by the spirits of the children who had died there, while others claimed that dark rituals had been performed within its walls. The four friends were in their early 20s and shared a love of urban exploration, often venturing into abandoned buildings and forgotten places in search of adventure. One rainy afternoon, as they gathered at Jack's house, he pulled out an old map of Elders Hollow. "I've been doing some research," he said, spreading the map on the table. "I found these old town records that mention the orphanage. There's a lot of weird stuff that went on there, and I think we should check it out." Emily, always the cautious one, frowned. "I've heard some really bad things about that place. Maybe we should let it stay forgotten." "Come on, Em," Ben said with a grin. He was the jokester of the group, always ready for a thrill. What's life without a little adventure? Besides, those are just stories. There's no such thing as ghosts. Sarah, the quietest and most introspective of the group, nodded. "I think we should go. It's not like we haven't explored creepy places before." Emily sighed, her curiosity getting the better of her. "Fine, but if anything feels off, we leave." "Agreed?" "Agreed," they echoed, sealing their pact. Jack had always been the leader of their group, the one who would suggest new places to explore and new adventures to undertake. He was tall and athletic, with an adventurous spirit that often got them into trouble. Emily was the brains of the group, with a keen sense of curiosity tempered by a healthy dose of skepticism. Ben, the joker, could always be counted on to lighten the mood, while Sarah's quiet introspection often brought a depth to their explorations that the others sometimes missed. As they discussed their plan, the rain continued to pour outside, the rhythmic sound creating a soothing backdrop to their conversation. The air was thick with anticipation and a hint of fear, but that was part of the thrill. They packed their gear with practiced efficiency, each of them knowing exactly what they would need for their latest adventure. The friends shared stories about their past explorations as they packed, reminiscing about the abandoned factory they had explored the previous summer and the old farmhouse that had turned out to be a treasure trove of antique furniture. These memories bonded them, making them feel invincible as they prepared to face the unknown. Jack's dog, Max, a loyal German shepherd, watched them with curious eyes. Max had been with Jack on many of their adventures, and his presence was always a source of comfort. "I wish we could take Max with us," Jack said, patting the dog's head, "but I don't think it's a good idea this time." Emily nodded. "Yeah, it's probably best if he stays here. We don't know what we'll find out there." The following Saturday, the friends met at Jack's house to prepare for their expedition. They packed flashlights, cameras, snacks, and a first aid kit, just in case. Jack, who had an old SUV that was perfect for their adventures, was designated as the driver. The excitement was palpable, but so was the underlying sense of foreboding. As they drove out of town, the roads became narrower and more overgrown. The path to the orphanage was barely visible, covered in fallen leaves and branches. The deeper they went into the woods, the more isolated they felt. The trees closed in around them, casting long shadows that danced in the flickering light of the setting sun. "Are we sure this is the right way?" Emily asked, peering out the window. "It feels like we've been driving forever." Jack nodded. "This is the way. We're almost there." The forest seemed to grow darker the further they went, the trees looming overhead like silent sentinels. The road, little more than a dirt track, twisted and turned, each bend revealing more of the same dense undergrowth. The sense of isolation grew stronger, an oppressive weight that settled over them. "Does anyone else feel like we're being watched?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ben laughed, though it sounded forced. "It's just your imagination, Sarah. There's nothing out here but us and the trees." But even he couldn't shake the feeling of unease. It was as if the forest itself was alive, watching them, waiting. The orphanage finally came into view, a towering structure that loomed over the landscape like a sentinel from a bygone era. Its once grand facade was now a haunting silhouette against the darkening sky. The windows were shattered, the roof sagging, and the walls covered in a thick layer of ivy and moss. As they approached, an unsettling silence fell over the group. "Well, here we are," Jack said, trying to keep his voice light. "Ready to go in?" Emily shivered, pulling her jacket tighter around her. "Let's just get this over with." They pried open the rusted front gate and made their way up the cracked steps to the front door. The door creaked ominously as they pushed it open, revealing a dark, musty interior. Dust motes danced in the beams of their flashlights, and the air was thick with the scent of decay. The entrance hall was grand, hinting at the orphanage's former glory. A massive chandelier hung from the ceiling, its crystals dulled by years of neglect. The friends fanned out, exploring the different rooms. They found decaying furniture, old toys, and faded photographs scattered throughout the building. In one room, Emily picked up a photograph of a group of children standing in front of the orphanage, their faces blurred by time. "These kids must have lived here," she murmured. Sarah, who had been exploring the room across the hall, called out to the others, "Guys, I found something." They gathered around Sarah, who was holding an old ledger. The pages were brittle and yellowed, but the writing was still legible. It contained the names of the children who had lived in the orphanage, along with notes about each one. "Look at this," Sarah said, pointing to a name circled in red ink. "Lily Evans. It says she disappeared." Jack frowned. "Disappeared? What happened to her?" As they flipped through the pages, they found more entries about children who had gone missing. The notes were vague, but there was a pattern. Each child had been marked with the same red ink. "This is creepy," Ben said, his bravado faltering. "What do you think happened to them?" Emily shuddered. "I don't know, but I have a bad feeling about this." They continued their exploration, each room revealing more about the orphanage's dark past. They found a nursery with rows of tiny beds, a playroom filled with broken toys, and a kitchen with rusted pots and pans still hanging on the walls. Each discovery added to the sense of dread that hung over them. In the headmistress's office, they found more journals and documents, each more disturbing than the last. The headmistress, Miss Caldwell, had been a cruel woman, her obsession with discipline bordering on the sadistic. Her writings hinted at punishments that went far beyond what was acceptable, and the friends couldn't help but feel a deep sense of sorrow for the children who had suffered under her care. As they continued to explore, the atmosphere grew heavier, the air colder. The friends couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. In the dining hall, they found a long table set for a meal, as if expecting guests who never arrived. The silverware was tarnished, and the plates covered in dust. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed through the building, making them jump. "What was that?" Sarah whispered, her eyes wide with fear. Jack tried to remain calm. "Probably just the wind. This place is falling apart." But Emily wasn't convinced. "We should leave. Now." Before they could decide, they heard a faint sound, like the giggle of a child. It seemed to come from the hallway behind them. The friends exchanged nervous glances. "Let's check it out," Jack said, his curiosity getting the better of him. They followed the sound, their flashlights flickering as they moved deeper into the orphanage. The giggling grew louder, more distinct, leading them to a door at the end of the hall. Jack pushed it open, revealing a small room filled with old toys and a single, unmade bed. On the bed sat a doll, its porcelain face cracked and its eyes eerily lifelike. Emily felt a chill run down her spine as she picked it up. This is just like the doll in the photograph. Suddenly, the door slammed shut, trapping them inside. Panic set in as they tried to open it, but it wouldn't budge. "What's happening?" Ben shouted, banging on the door. The room grew colder, and the giggling returned, louder and more menacing. The friends huddled together, their breaths visible in the icy air. The doll in Emily's hand began to move, its head turning to face them. "Put it down," Jack yelled. Emily dropped the doll, and it fell to the floor with a thud. The giggling stopped, replaced by a whispering voice. "You shouldn't have come here." Fear gripped them as the whispering continued, growing louder and more insistent. They had to get out. Desperation gave them strength, and together they managed to force the door open. They ran through the halls, the whispers following them, echoing off the walls. They reached the entrance hall, only to find the front door had slammed shut, the rusty hinges now unyielding. Jack looked around frantically, spotting a side door that led to the basement. "This way," he shouted, leading the group down the narrow stairs. The basement was even darker and colder, the air thick with the scent of mold and decay. Their flashlights flickered as they navigated the labyrinthine corridors, searching for an exit. The whispering voices grew louder, and the friends could feel unseen eyes watching them. In the dim light, they found a small window near the ceiling. It was their only way out. Jack and Ben worked together to pry it open, while Emily and Sarah kept watch. The whispers seemed to converge, forming a chorus of voices that sent shivers down their spines. "Hurry," Emily urged, glancing over her shoulder. With a final push, the window opened, and Jack helped Sarah and Emily climb through. Ben followed, but as Jack was about to climb out, a cold hand grabbed his ankle, pulling him back. "Jack!" Sarah screamed, reaching for him. He kicked at the unseen force, finally breaking free. With Sarah's help, he scrambled through the window and fell to the ground outside. They were out, but the voices continued to echo in their minds. The friends ran through the woods, not stopping until they reached Jack's SUV. They piled in, and Jack sped away, not daring to look back. The drive back to town was silent, each of them lost in their thoughts, trying to process what had happened. Back at Jack's house, they sat in stunned silence. Emily was particularly shaken by the events. She had always been the pragmatic one, the skeptic among them, and now her sense of reality was deeply rattled. She sat huddled in the corner of Jack's living room, her eyes darting around as if expecting something to leap out from the shadows at any moment. "Look," Jack said, pacing back and forth. "We need to understand what happened. Maybe there's a logical explanation." "Logical?" Ben scoffed. "What's logical about dolls moving and ghostly whispers?" "We don't know they were ghosts," Jack insisted. "It could have been, I don't know, some kind of trick." Emily snapped her head up. "Trick? By who? There was no one else there, Jack. Just us and whatever those things were." Sarah, who had been quiet, stood up. "I think we should go back." Everyone turned to look at her, expressions ranging from shock to horror. "Are you crazy?" Ben asked. "Why would we go back there?" "Because we need answers," Sarah replied. "We can't just run away and pretend it didn't happen. Those kids, something terrible happened to them, and if we don't find out what, it's like we're abandoning them all over again." Jack nodded slowly. "Sarah's right. We need to go back, but we'll be better prepared this time." Reluctantly, Ben and Emily agreed. They spent the next few hours gathering supplies, extra flashlights, batteries, rope, and even a few makeshift weapons, just in case. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the town, they steeled themselves for the return trip. The drive back to the orphanage was tense, the earlier excitement replaced by a somber determination. The forest seemed darker, more foreboding, as if it knew they were coming and didn't welcome their return. The orphanage loomed ahead, more sinister than ever. This time, they entered through the basement window, the only entry point they knew wouldn't be barricaded. The basement was cold and damp, the air thick with the scent of mold and decay. As they moved through the labyrinthine corridors, their flashlights flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. "We need to find out more about the headmistress," Jack said, his voice echoing in the confined space. "She's the key to all of this." They made their way back to the main floor, searching for the headmistress's office. The orphanage was even more unsettling than before, every creak and groan amplified by their heightened senses. Finally, they found the office, a room that had once been grand but was now a decaying shell. Jack rifled through the desk drawers, finding old letters and documents. "Here," he said, pulling out a leather-bound journal. "This looks like it belonged to her." Emily took the journal, her hands shaking as she opened it. The pages were filled with spidery handwriting, detailing the daily operations of the orphanage. But as they read further, the entries became darker, more erratic. "She was obsessed with immortality," Emily whispered. "She believed that by performing certain rituals, she could transfer the life force of the children into herself." "That's sick," Ben said, his face pale. "But it makes sense," Sarah said. "Those disappearances, the red ink in the ledger, it was all part of her plan." Suddenly, the room grew colder, and the whispering voices returned, louder and more insistent. The friends huddled together, their breaths visible in the icy air. The door to the office creaked open, and they saw shadows moving in the hallway. "We need to get out of here," Jack said urgently. They ran through the orphanage, the whispers following them, growing louder and more malevolent. The building seemed to come alive, doors slamming shut, walls closing in. They reached the entrance hall, but the front door was still locked. "This way," Jack shouted, leading them back to the basement. As they descended the stairs, the shadows grew darker, the voices more desperate. The friends scrambled through the basement, searching for the window. But the basement was a maze, and the window seemed to move, always just out of reach. "Over here," Ben shouted, finding the window at last. They climbed through one by one, the whispers now a cacophony of voices, pleading, angry, desperate. As Jack pulled himself through, he felt a cold hand grab his ankle, pulling him back. He kicked at the unseen force, finally breaking free with Sarah's help. They ran through the woods, not stopping until they reached Jack's SUV. They piled in, and Jack sped away, not daring to look back. The drive back to town was silent, each of them lost in their thoughts, trying to process what had happened. Back at Jack's house, they sat in stunned silence. Emily was the first to speak. "What the hell was that?" "I don't know," Jack said, his voice shaking, "but we need to tell someone. The police, the town council, someone." Ben shook his head. "And say what? That we were attacked by ghosts in an abandoned orphanage? They'd think we're crazy." Sarah looked at the photograph in her hand, the faces of the missing children staring back at her. "We can't just do nothing. Those kids, whatever happened to them, they deserve to be remembered." Over the next few days, the friends researched the orphanage's history, uncovering a dark past of abuse and neglect. The headmistress, Miss Caldwell, had been a cruel woman, rumored to dabble in the occult. Children had gone missing under her care, their disappearances covered up by the staff. Armed with this information, they went to the town council, presenting their findings. At first, they were met with skepticism, but the evidence was too compelling to ignore. An investigation was launched, and the town rallied to uncover the truth about the orphanage. The investigation revealed hidden rooms and secret passages in the orphanage, where the children had been kept and subjected to unspeakable horrors. The remains of the missing children were found, their spirits finally laid to rest. The town of Elders Hollow came together to honor the memory of the children, holding a memorial service in their honor. The orphanage was demolished, and a park was built in its place, a symbol of new beginnings and a tribute to those who had suffered. For Jack, Emily, Sarah, and Ben, the experience left them changed, They had faced their fears and uncovered a terrible truth, but they had also found a sense of closure. They had given the children a voice, and in doing so, they had brought peace to the town. In the weeks that followed, they continued to delve into the history of Elders Hollow, uncovering more secrets and stories. The town had a dark past, but it also had a resilience that shone through. The friends knew that they had a duty to protect their home, to ensure that the horrors of the past were never forgotten, and to make sure that they were never repeated. As they stood in the newly built park, looking at the memorial plaque that listed the names of the children who had died in the orphanage, they felt a sense of pride. They had done something important, something that would be remembered for generations to come. "We did good," Jack said, his voice filled with emotion. "Yeah, we did," Emily replied, wiping away a tear. They stood together, their bond stronger than ever, knowing that they had made a difference. The whispers in the dark had been silenced, but their echoes would serve as a reminder of the importance of courage, friendship, and the relentless pursuit of truth. The forgotten orphanage was no longer a place of fear and mystery. It was a place of remembrance and healing, a testament to the power of facing one's fears and uncovering the truth, no matter how dark it may be.